Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me today in the next discussion in the True Path Thrive Tuesday series, Cognitive Filtration, Discerning Signal from Noise. In this session, we move into the knowledge pillar. When our system is stabilized, the next need is clarity. We're not looking for answers or action, but rather discernment. This session is not about deciding what is true, it's about understanding how information is filtered, interpreted, and scaled inside of our system. Many people struggle not because they lack intuition or intelligence, but because everything arrives at the same volume. Urgent, important, meaningful, and threatening, it doesn't matter, it all blends together. Cognitive filtration is the process by which information is sorted so our signals can be distinguished from noise. Today we look at how filtration breaks down, why false urgency feels convincing, and what changes when the system can finally receive information without distortion. Take a moment to arrive fully wherever you're listening from, and let us begin. If we've not met, I am Tara Palazzolo, the founder of True Path CO and the creator of the True Path framework. I do not approach personal growth as a matter of discipline, motivation, or fixing habits. I approach it as a matter of systems literacy. Over time, I began to notice that many of the patterns people blame themselves for are not personal failures. They are the result of operating inside systems, be it professional, relational, or cultural, that reward urgency and penalize regulation. My perspective was shaped by years of operating inside a high-performance environments where self-override is normalized, incentivized, and often mistaken for resilience. In those environments, the ability to ignore internal signals is treated as a strength, even when it leads to burnout, confusion, or loss of clarity. My work focuses on replacing shame with design thinking. Instead of asking what's wrong with somebody, I instead ask what information is missing, misscaled, or arriving at the wrong time. One of the core assumptions in my work is simple. A lack of exposure is not a lack of capability. Most people are not failing at discernment. Rather, they were never taught how to filter information under pressure. This session comes from this perspective. We're not questioning anybody's desire to grow. We're looking at the belief that growth requires constant pressure. Before we talk about signal and noise, we need to understand where we're at and where we're currently operating. We're going to perform a landscape check. What information feels loud right now to you? If you need to pause this learning, take this time now, and when you're ready, let's continue. Thank you for checking in on what information feels loud to you right now. When information arrives without a clear filtration, certain themes tend to appear. One common pattern is that action replaces prioritization. When information is not ranked, everything feels like it requires a response, even when no immediate decision is necessary. Another pattern is intolerance for unresolved information. When signals cannot be held in a pending state, our system pushes towards closure simply to reduce cognitive strain. Urgency often emerges as a substitute for relevance. Speed becomes a sorting mechanism when meaning is unclear, and everything begins to feel important at once. You might relate to this as having 5 number 1 priorities, which is not sustainable. Next, pausing can feel unsafe, not because rest is threatening, but because the sorting has not completed. Without filtration, stopping feels like losing track of information. Delay is often mistaken for disengagement. When information is not yet processed, the system fears that stepping back means dropping something essential. These patterns are frequently mislabeled as poor discipline or avoidance. That framing misses the mechanism. I want to note that these are not character flaws. They are signs of unresolved information load, and you may relate to some of these, all of these, or none of these. The important thing is when filtration improves, pressure decreases, not because less information exists, but because it's finally being sorted correctly. What cognitive filtration is. Before we move on, we need to name the process that sits underneath both signal and noise. Cognitive filtration is how the mind sorts information before it becomes action, meaning, or a belief. It determines what reaches our attention at what volume, what is deferred, and what never moves forward at all. This process operates continuously and mostly outside of our awareness. When it's functioning, information is scaled appropriately. Not everything needs to move at the same pace or carries the same weight. Some information is registered and held, some is noted and released, and some becomes actionable because it aligns with the present moment. Cognitive filtration is not about deciding whether it's true or important. It's about managing volume, timing, and the relevance before interpretation begins. Cognitive filtration changes based on load, environment, and demand. When filtration capacity is exceeded, sorting does not complete, and information continues to arrive, but prioritization stalls. In this moment, nothing has failed. It's just simply the system doing the best it can with the capacity available. Understanding this process gives a neutral way to examine clarity without judgment. It allows us to talk about signal and noise as outcomes of processing and not personal ability. Signal versus noise. Now we can name the distinction of what we've been preparing for. Signal and noise are not about right versus wrong information. They're about whether information can be used accurately in the present moment. Signal is an information that's relevant, proportional, and actionable for the current moment. It meets the system at the scale and timing it can actually work with. Noise is not about false information. It's information that arrives without proportion or timing and without any context. It may be accurate, emotional, urgent, or even important, but if it can't be acted on or integrated now, it becomes noise. Noise includes information that's excessive, emotionally amplified, or context-free, or even misscaled, meaning its urgency or intensity exceeds what the moment actually requires. This is why people can feel overwhelmed even when they're consuming good or true information. The issue is not about quality, it's about usability. Some information belongs to now, some belongs to later, and then some belongs somewhere else entirely. And the discernment is the ability to tell the difference. This distinction matters because discernment is not about finding the right answer. It's about receiving the right amount of information at the right time in a form that our nervous system can actually use. When signal and noise are clearly separated, clarity becomes possible. Pressure drops not because less information exists, but because it's finally arriving in usable form. Why filtration gets dismissed. Filtration is often misunderstood because its effects are the easiest to miss. In cultures that reward speed, responsiveness, and constant availability, filtration can look like hesitation or overthinking rather than a necessary stage of processing. Holding information before acting is often mistaken for indecision. Prioritizing relevance is mistaken for disengagement. And slowing the flow of input is mistaken for missing something important. These associations are learned. They reflect environments where visible action is valued more than internal resolution. And filtration does not announce itself, and it does not create an urgency, and it doesn't produce an immediate external output. Because of this, it's easy to dismiss or override, especially in systems that equate movement with effectiveness. And the misunderstanding is not personal, it's cultural. Recognizing this helps separate filtration from judgment often placed on it and creates a space for discernment to operate without pressure. Why urgency feels convincing. Urgency feels clarifying because it collapses complexity. Multiple possibilities narrowed into a single demand allows for ambiguity to disappear, and choice often feels replaced by necessity. This can even feel like clarity even when it's not. Urgency does not resolve information, it suppresses it. By forcing immediacy, urgency reduces the need to prioritize, weigh relevance, or tolerate uncertainty. It tells the system what to do now, even if the instruction is incomplete or misaligned. This is why urgency can often feel relieving. It removes decision-making friction, but the relief is not the same as accuracy. Urgency bypasses filtration by design and moves information straight into action without allowing sorting to complete. Nothing about this makes urgency deceptive or malicious. It's efficient. and works quickly. In a genuinely time-saving situation, it's necessary. The problem arises when urgency is applied indiscriminately. When urgency becomes the default mode of engagement, it replaces discernment rather than supporting it. Understanding why urgency feels convincing allows us to recognize it without obeying it automatically, and that recognition is the first step towards restoring choice. False urgency versus time-sensitive action. At this point, a clarification is important. Not all urgency is false. Some situations generally require a timely response. The distinction is not speed, it's signal quality. False urgency creates pressure without clarity. It compresses time, amplifies your stakes, and demands action before information has yet to be integrated. The system feels pushed, not guided. Time-sensitive action feels different. Even when movement is required, there's a sense of orientation. The action makes sense in context. Information is incomplete, but it's proportional in the moment. False urgency narrows choice by force. Time-sensitive action narrows choice by relevance. In false urgency, action is taken to relieve pressure. In time-sensitive action, it's taken because a delay would reduce usefulness. One creates compulsion, and the other creates a direction. This distinction matters because many people override signals out of fear of missing something important. They respond quickly, not because the moment requires it, but because the pressure feels authoritative. Learning to tell these two apart is not about slowing everything down. It's about responding accurately. Urgency doesn't become trustworthy because it's intense. It becomes trustworthy when it's grounded in context. And that's when discernment begins to return. The cost of ignoring signals. Ignoring a signal does not usually lead to immediate failure. This is part of why it's so easy to sustain. The cost shows up gradually through small shifts of how decisions are made and how information is handled. When a signal is constantly overridden, decisions become reactive rather than oriented. Action continues, and the system responds to what is loud rather than what's useful. Over time, more energy is spent revisiting decisions, correcting missteps, or responding to secondary issues that arise from acting on incomplete information. Clarity also erodes. Information stops resolving cleanly and begins to blur together. Everything feels important, but nothing feels completed. As this continues, pressure replaces prioritization. Urgency becomes the main organizing force, not because it's accurate, but because it simplifies the choice. Eventually, trust in decision-making degrades. Not in our intuition or intelligence, but trust in the system's ability to recognize what matters. And decision-making becomes exhausting because every choice carries unnecessary weight. This is the cumulative effect of repeatedly overriding a signal. And the cost is not a full system collapse, it's just a drift, which is difficult to notice while movement continues. Restoring attention to the signal allows clarity to return without force and action to regain direction. Seeing the landscape differently. This side is about contrast, not correction. On the left are interpretations that are often formed in response to pressure-based environments. These are not wrong, they're productive. When stability is unfamiliar or has been associated with loss in the past, the system fills in the meaning quickly. Reduced intensity gets interpreted as a loss of momentum. Neutral pace feels unproductive. Stillness registers as risk. Those interpretations make sense in systems where attention, worth, or opportunity were tied to constant engagement. This pressure becomes familiar and urgency feels sort of stable. On the right is a different belief orientation, not as a replacement but a reframe. Here, stability is understood as a condition that allows information to settle within our system. We reduce intensity does not mean that less is happening. It also means that signals are no longer competing with noise. A neutral pace supports integration. Stillness provides orientation rather than a threat, and movement is not something that has to be manufactured. It emerges naturally when the system can read itself clearly. This is not about choosing one side and rejecting the other. It's about recognizing what interpretation is running automatically and where you are. Beliefs shape what the system does with internal states before any conscious decisions are made. Seeing the landscape differently does not require action. It simply changes what stability is allowed to mean. When the signal is allowed to lead, the most noticeable change is not a dramatic action, it's a shift on how the information shows up. Decisions regain orientation. Instead of reacting to what is loud or urgent, choices are shaped by relevance and timing. Fewer options compete at once, and direction begins to feel clearer. Pressure also decreases, but momentum is not lost. Movement continues, just without the constant push. Action becomes easier to sustain because it's no longer compensating for unresolved information. Information itself starts to resolve. Instead of stacking inputs endlessly, the system can complete cycles of understanding. Some information becomes actionable, some is deferred, and others are released entirely. Timing becomes more apparent. There is less guessing about when to act just because a signal carries a sense of readiness that urgency cannot replicate. Effort aligns more closely with relevance, and the energy is spent where it actually matters rather than being distributed across noise. None of this requires forcing calm, slowing everything down, or trusting blindly. It happens because information is finally being received at a scale that our nervous system can use. When the signal leads, clarity does not need to be chased. It emerges naturally through proportion. Applying cognitive filtration in real time. This does not require new habits, tools, or techniques. It begins with noticing how information is arriving and how your system is responding. In any given moment, multiple inputs may be present at once: thoughts, emotions, external demands, future considerations. Some information may feel loud or urgent, but still be unusable in the present moment. Some may be relevant, but not time sensitive. Others may clearly meet the moment and invite action. Applying filtration means allowing these distinctions to exist without immediately collapsing them into action. This does not mean ignoring information. It means letting information land long enough to be sorted by relevance and timing. When filtration is allowed to complete, pressure often decreases on its own. Real-time application looks quiet from the outside. Internally, it restores orientation, and over time, this becomes the foundation for clearer, more sustainable decision-making. When filtration is working, the most noticeable shift is not a change in behavior, it's a change in effort. Decisions require less energy because fewer inputs are competing at once. Our nervous system is no longer trying to hold everything simultaneously, so the choices feel lighter and more contained. Timing also becomes easier to sense. Instead of guessing when to act or relying on urgency to decide, information carries its own sense of readiness. Action aligns more naturally with context. Pressure loses its role as a motivator, not because of responsibility disappears, but because prioritization has already occurred. Clarity also becomes more durable. It does not collapse as quickly under new information because the filtration continues to sort rather than accumulate. New inputs are integrated or deferred instead of overwhelming our nervous system. When filtration is working, effort decreases because accuracy increases. When noise stops being an identity. When noise has been present for a long time, it often becomes personalized. People begin to describe themselves as scattered, inconsistent, indecisive, or reactive, not because those qualities are inherent, but because their nervous systems have been operating under sustained informational overload. When filtration improves, one of the quieter shifts is identity separation. The system stops mistaking volume for character. Patterns that once felt personal traits are recognized as responses from overload. Pace is no longer used to explain who somebody is. Capacity is no longer measured by how much can be endured. This does not require redefining identity or adopting a new narrative. It happens naturally as pressure decreases and information begins to resolve. Authority also changes here. Instead of being something that must be asserted or proven through speed, authority becomes a function of orientation. Our decisions feel owned, not defended. Importantly, this is not about becoming calmer, more focused, or more disciplined. It's about removing noise from the identity equation. What remains is not a, quote, better self, but a cleaner system. When noise stops being mistaken for who you are, Self-criticism loses relevance. Clarity becomes easier to trust because it's no longer entangled with survival or performance. That is not a transformation, it's merely a clarification. Choose your path. This slide is not a call to action, it's a choice point. Up to now, I've been naming mechanisms, patterns, and how information behaves under pressure. Here, authority returns where it belongs. Reorientation is not a force, it's remembering where the authority lives. The statements on the slide are not affirmations, they're permissions on how I hold myself and that others are free to recognize in their own way. When I say I allow information to settle before responding, I'm not delaying action. I'm acknowledging that not all information needs to be handled at once in order to be valid. When I say I release the belief that urgency is the same as importance, this is not about ignoring responsibility. It's about recognizing that urgency have often been standing in for prioritization in ways that are no longer accurate. Lastly, when I say I trust my capacity to recognize what's usable now, this is not about certainty. It's about responding to the scale and timing of the present moment rather than pressure. These are not rules I follow, they're orientations I return to. I don't step into them because I should, I step into them because they're true. Others may recognize different permissions for themselves, and that choice is part of where authority lives. Explore True Path resources. This session is an orientation. We've been focusing on naming patterns, beliefs, and conditions. It's meant to give you a language and a reference point that you can return to when things feel noisy, pressured, or unclear. The deeper work happens through structure. If you want to continue exploring this work, there are resources available through TruePath.co. These include workbooks, courses, journals, guided practices, and other structured materials designed to support self-trust and regulation in real-world conditions. For people who work best through direct conversation, there's also an option to explore working with me one-on-one. My work respects timing, capacity, and autonomy. This session is a standalone, but these containers are mentioned so you know where support lives if you want to explore it more. Choose where you want to start, explore at your own pace, and build a life that you can thrive in. Thrive with free resources. On Tuesdays, I share new content. These sessions are available across several platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, and the free resource section of the TruePath website. You can choose the platform that fits your life and how you prefer to engage. Each session is approximately 30 minutes. They are designed as consistent support you can access when it's useful. The topics shift with real life. Seasonal transitions, relationships, work, identity, pressure, and the kinds of moments where intuition's overridden. There's no sequence to follow and nothing to complete. You can listen occasionally or return regularly. I've created this content as a resource, not to demand engagement. Upcoming sessions are February 17th, Micro Movements, February 24th, Reframing as a Creative Act, and March 3rd, Creation Without Betrayal. Your feedback shapes these sessions. I invite you to share your insight so I can build each week around what to serve you best. Thank you for joining me today, for practicing awareness in real time and approaching this topic with curiosity. Awareness is not passive. It's an active orientation towards what's actually happening rather than what's expected or assumed. Noticing your signals as they arise is how authority begins to return, not through force or correction, but through recognition. I appreciate your attention, your presence, and your willingness to look honestly at how trust operates in your life. That willingness is where strategy begins. Until next time, I'm Tara Palazzolo, and let your inner compass guide you.